Well, I know.
Hello, everyone. Welcome again to Astrolore and Hidden Path Astrology, joining together today to do a video about the Virgo full moon. Now, before we start into the Virgo full moon, I just want to say, please like this video, share it with your friends, make a comment, go to Jennie's website at hiddenpathastrology.com and come to mine at astrolore.org. There's lots that you can find that we're doing out here in the world, and it's probably time for you to get your astrology chart done for yourself. But for now, we're talking about the full moon in Virgo. Do you want to talk about the cycles a little bit, Jennie?
Sure. Yep. I can do that. So today we're talking about the full moon. The full moon can, in a lot of ways, just be thought of the midpoint of the whole moon phase cycle. The moon phase cycle starts with the new moon. That's when you can't see the moon at all in the sky because it's right next to the sun. So you're just not going to be able to see it at all. It doesn't show up. It's dark. As the moon grows in light, which it does over the course of the next 2 weeks, it waxes and it gets bigger and there's more and more light to be seen. And then you hit that full moon point. And at that point, the moon and the sun are directly opposite from each other in the sky. So they're going to be in totally opposite astrology signs, which is something you've probably learned if you've watched some of these videos. And then the second half of the cycle, it closes back down. It ends up back into a half moon where you see the half dark, half light, and then all the way back and folds into the cycle, and it's over and it starts over again. So basically, the full moon is really that crux point. In some ways, you can think about the first half of the cycle as a house being built, a foundation being poured, the structure being built, wood goes up, walls go up, and then a roof goes on, and you have a house. Once you hit the full moon, you make that house into a home. So the whole second half of the cycle is to do with bringing meaning to that first house, the first half. So that's another way to think about it, is that you're really bringing life and yourself into that home space and making it have meaning. So it's not just a bunch of wood nailed together.
I love how you just described that. That's wonderful.
Oh, well, I'm showing my roots as a builder before but there is many other ways to think about it. It's likened to the plant cycle. The full moon is like the full flower that you would see. And there's other things to think about, but it's just really nice to think in terms of cycles, that you have a chance to start something new, that this is another go round where you can do something a bit different. What would you like to add to that, Laurie?
Well, just, thinking about cycles, I think about cycles a lot, and we are sort of taught in our culture that we live in this linear world. And as you start really watching the planetary cycles and how they impact our lives, you realize more and more how everything in our lives is cyclical. It's not linear. And yeah, the time of the full moon is that full illumination. It's a time of celebration. It's a time when you can really see how far you've come. And I love the thought of you have a house and now you turn it into a home. That's a really lovely way to think about it. So let's open up the chart and take a look at the particulars of this Virgo moon.
Yeah, as I'm opening this up, the thing to remember is what I said in the beginning there is that we're looking at an opposition. We're looking at the moon directly opposite from the sun. So by definition, that we're looking at a polarity. We're looking at two things pulling at each other, and there's perhaps some tension in there. But what I think is really unique about this chart, and you can see it almost right away, is that all the planets are clustered together at the bottom of this chart. And the moon is by itself up there in the top half of the chart. So that really is asking for our attention to be put just briefly in this completely opposite place of where we feel so pulled right now, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So in the simplest of terms, we have the sun with a whole bunch of things with Pisces in it. So we have a very Piscean, the dreamy, imaginative, like boundaryless kind of thing going on. And then all of a sudden you have this moon in extremely practical Virgo.
Right.
So you might be wondering, I mean, I think it's kind of obvious what the polarity is here, that kind of dreaminess of the Pisces and then the tangibility of Virgo. But they also resonate together, right?
Right. Right. Well, they're both mutable signs. So they're both very adaptable, and yeah, they're very adaptable signs.
Mm-hmm.
It, it's so interesting in this period of time. One of the things that we were talking about is, yes, on the one hand, Pisces holds our imagination, our that timeless quality where you can't quite grasp things, but you can see these visions. It's such a beautiful sign. And on the other hand, very relevant in today's world is Pisces is also about human suffering and compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really important thing for us all to be thinking about right now. And with that opposition to that moon in Virgo, what can you practically do? The whole practicality of Virgo. What can you as an individual do in a practical manner to help support the dream of escaping from that suffering? And well, your own personal dreams are embodied in that, and the suffering of others. And practically, how are you managing both of those things, your own personal dreams and the suffering of others?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think when you're mentioning the suffering, I think of, I mean, we know there's war that's just being declared. There's been lots of suffering anyway with the pandemic and with all other things in being a human being right now. But what I think about is like looking out at that suffering and going, gosh, like so many people are hungry, and so many people need to be fed, and seeing that bigger picture of suffering. And then the Virgo moon brings you to, well, let's go make a pot of soup.
Yeah. How can I help?
Exactly. Like,
How
and
can I
it
help?
rolls up its sleeves and it goes to the store and it buys the things and it makes the soup. It cooks the soup and it brings it out to somebody. So that's just an image to kind of understand a little bit more about how the two work together and what they do have in common, which is this idea of I'm sort of like sacrifice versus service, and kind of seeing the bigger picture, but then figuring out what small action to take that actually will have a big impact. Even if you feed 2 people with that soup, it doesn't matter. That the action that you take is incredibly important.
Yes.
So that's kind of how they work together.
Yeah. Polarities are always 2 sides of the same coin. And it is, Pisces is very much about selfless service. Well, Virgo, they're both about service. Both Pisces and Virgo are about being of service to others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, I think the other thing you mentioned at the beginning, they're both mutable signs. So that mutable signs are very changeable and adaptable. And so that means that they are kind of like, ooh, something needs to happen. I need to take an action. I need to do something right now. I need to shift what I'm doing and shift into this new mode. The other thing is that they are both yin signs. Water and earth are both yin. So that's sort of the downward oriented signs that respond to gravity. But they also are signs, both earth and water has a kind of a yielding quality to it, where it's receptive and it's taking things on. And so that's part of why you also see this desire to address something, to address the suffering, or the dream, the idea that the world could be a better place. I mean, Pisces is very idealistic.
Right.
There's things that we could shift towards. There's a vision we could shift towards. There's a view of all living together on one planet, and we've got to work it out. We've got to figure it out. And the Virgo moon speaks to, well, how do you do that?
Right.
You start by doing something useful for somebody, your neighbor, or something like that. So,
and one of the other things that really strikes me with this is, in 2 days, 2 days after this full moon, the sun is moving into Aries. And that's when the true action you know, you might sit home and make your soup and give it to your neighbor, but in another couple of days, you're going to really have a push to take a much bigger action on this as well. You know, maybe you'll go work at the soup kitchen. I don't know.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of, you know, we are really setting up. I feel like this full moon is really setting us up to take a major action. The sun, you know, you think about the sun has been going, you know, through this Pisces area, and it doesn't have a lot of action orientation. It's dreaming of what's needed, and it will be pushing in just a few days. I think that's going to really be a big change this year.
That's a good point too, because the moon, I mean, they're both going to move very quickly into cardinal sign a couple days after. And this chart really is showing us the very end of the season. The mutable signs always show us the endings of the seasons. In the northern hemisphere, this is the very last blast of winter, and moving into spring, and that action oriented of like, okay, it's time to plant the seeds. It's time for things to move into this new realm of action. So I think that's a great point, Laurie. We got something else to talk about this chart.
There's something else really, really sweet in here. And that is the moon is making a beautiful trine aspect to Pluto. It's actually, I'm going to draw the whole thing out just because I can't help it. It's actually forming a grand trine with Pluto and the North Node. You know, whatever actions you're taking, whatever service you are being, whatever practical service that you can offer is going to make a big difference.
That Pluto brings in the symbolism of empowerment. And so what this is really saying, in my opinion, is what you just said, Laurie. What you do matters. What small action you take, what tangible task you take on in the name of service to help somebody out, no matter how small, it matters, because it gets woven into the fabric of the collective consciousness. And that is
that's the empowerment of Pluto. Exactly. The power of all. And then the trine to the North Node, that's the direction, the motion forward. So this is a really very powerful full moon. I like the looks of it.
And you can probably see, like those of you watching this video, like isn't it so clear how that sun is just its opposite? So it's really the point of action. Like you see that stable triangle, and you see the moon opposite the sun with, I mean, the red line helps too, but that's the statement around the dream, and the witnessing of the suffering is, it is what is driving this tangibility. So it's kind of like this thing out there, and we're responding to it, and the response needs to happen in the earth realm of practical tasks and effort, and that is symbolized by Pluto and Capricorn, the moon in Virgo, and that North Node in Taurus. So that's a pretty awesome statement, I think.
That's lovely. I love it. Okay, so the other thing that we usually look at when we look at these the full moon videos is the traveled path of the moon since the new moon. So since the new moon happened, which was on March 2nd, that was the that was the Pisces new moon. What has the moon touched off on? Neptune, probably, because the sun would have been, was that 14? So it has actually passed over Jupiter, Neptune, and Uranus. So it's very much, you know, other than Jupiter, it's very much the way outer planets that have so much more to do with the collective than with us personally. So that's kind of interesting that our attention, well, since March 2nd, our attention has probably been a lot more on these bigger collective issues than on our own personal little lives, perhaps.
Yeah, and I mean, I also think with the moon picking up, going past Uranus, I think about it having this conversation with Uranus about, I mean, I think it really talks a lot about our food systems and the changes with that, but also
Mm,
just the environment. And I think part of the collective suffering right now is that we all know on a basic soul level about the degradation of the environment. And that is part and parcel of who we are. We like to think that we're separate, but we are not. We are part
that's
of the
true.
system, and we all feel
Yeah.
at a soul level what that is, at that loss and the suffering. And I keep hearing this from people. This theme keeps popping up. And whether you call yourself an environmentalist or not, that's not the point.
Right.
It's deeper than that.
Yeah.
Think about the fact that as human beings, we've evolved on this earth over tens of thousands of years outside. It's only been the last few years, 50, 100 years, that we've been in an interior environment.
Yeah.
So the truth of our heritage is way beyond
Yeah.
just being indoors. It's an outdoor thing.
Yeah.
And so I think that is a part of what we're seeing. And that this Virgo moon is perhaps an invitation to really consider that and think about, what do you want to do about that in this one moment?
Yeah.
What can you do about that? What tangible thing can you do?
Yeah. It's so interesting. Just makes me think. I kind of an odd thing, but I was talking with my sister who lives out in Utah. And, it's basically a desert where she lives. And people are being encouraged to plant small amounts of grass because I wish I could remember, but environmentally, people are being encouraged in desert environments to do things in a very specific way. And those are that's like Virgo, that, taking these actions, even though they might seem really small, that can make a big difference.
Yeah, planting a tree, like it takes what, half hour, and then that tree's going to grow there for 80, 100, 200 years. I mean, that's a really good point.
Right. And it depending on where you live in the world, there are different things that can help that might seem very minor.
Yeah,
But if you
habitat for bees,
yeah, plant some milkweed because the bees like it, or whatever it is you do, these little actions that can be helpful. Anyway,
awesome.
That's an interesting little tangent to go off on. So figure out what little actions you can do right now, not only to help the suffering that's going on in war-torn areas and that kind of thing, but for the environment as well. And for your neighbors.
Yep.
Okay.
Awesome.
All right.
All right.
Are we ready to jump into the individual looking at where this is falling in people's charts?
Yeah, let's do that. And so I'll stop sharing, Laurie, so you can get those charts out, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Here we go. We're going to start out. If you have Aries rising, this is where, let me get this set up here. The full moon is happening between your 12th and your 6th house. The sun is in your 12th house, which is the unconscious, is a real unconscious area. And the 6th is the day-to-day routines. This is pretty simple. This is a very simple statement.
Okay. Yeah, look at that chart. That is a very clear picture between the moon and the sun. And it really shows you how the moon is kind of holding down that one whole half of the chart, is what I was thinking about. That Western hemisphere, which is really, what individual action are you going to take to affect other people? And in the 6th house, this is how are you going to, well, I was kind of thinking about like, how do you do self-care? But in this case, self-care might be doing a service for your neighbor or for somebody nearby, or somebody that needs a helping hand.
Yeah. Yeah. And it also can be quite personal, and probably both.
Yeah.
Like with all of these things, it's, there's many reflections that we get. And, you know, there's this suffering in your own unconscious that you need to take care of yourself, you know, between that. So yeah, if you've got Aries rising, really self-care is very important.
Yeah.
That's a place to really pay attention right now. So now if you have Taurus rising, let's look at that one here. Okay. If you've got Taurus rising, this is happening between your 11th house and your 5th house.
Nice. All right. So I was thinking that that full moon is really just inviting you to powerfully engage with life, like just the creativity of living. You know, it's just like do something that is a way of maybe it's taking a risk or a way of really finding joy for that Virgo moon. And how do we do this? By taking some kind of tangible action in that. Like I was thinking, and in the polarity with that 11th house of community, it's sort of like do something theatrical and then ask for a donation. Let your
I like that.
community support you, you know?
Huh, I like that. I like that. That's an interesting way to think about it. Yeah, it's like the sun is shining from the 11th house. It's like, yes, letting, exactly what you said, letting the community support your creativity. That's great. Okay, so now, again, going to Gemini rising, we see that that brings this polarity to the sun in the 10th house and the moon in the 4th.
Lovely.
So this is very much about, you know, the practical action being taken is around your home and family.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this could be something a little more esoteric, like your deeply rooted lineage that needs a practical
Yeah.
action, like maybe some research needs to be done around your roots or your, you know, something like that. But it also could be something much more like clean your house,
Right, right.
you know, like mop the floor because it needs it, you know, and I mean, it is as simple as that, and kind of allow that tangibility to ground you, because whatever your profession is, that's where this like much bigger dream and the intangibility lives in your profession. So it's kind of like let your home life ground you through those little actions.
Yeah, perfect. That's perfect. Let your home and family ground you from that space that feels a little overwhelming right now.
Yeah.
You know, I think of wherever Pisces is in everyone's chart, it's sort of a sweet spot, and it's got a lot of complexity in it as well. But yeah, really grounding it in that practicality of family.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's move on to those of you who have Cancer rising. Do you know anyone like that, Jenny?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
I said that's me right
That's you. That's you. Okay. So here the sun is in the 9th and the moon is in the 3rd. So the practical actions that need to be taken are in the area of how you communicate, possibly related to siblings or just your day-to-day thought processes, your neighbors, the person behind the counter at the grocery store.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
of that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think this is, I mean, you said the need to communicate. I think, yes, this is what is your carefully crafted communication that you need to deliver to the world right now. And even though it's sort of in this 3rd house of basic communication, it's very much fueled by this big Piscean dream that's behind the scenes. So it's basically like pour that energy onto, you know, the written page or into a communication with someone else. I also think Virgo does imply a bit more writing, I think, to a degree, because it is the pick up the pen or type on the computer and actually write stuff down. But anyway, it's something about bringing kindness and tangibility into just your communication.
Yeah, it's
Taking-
taking your worldview and
Mhm.
bringing it into a practical application of communication.
Yeah,
And
awesome.
that's a lot of what you do, Jenny. So
Yeah,
that's that's awesome. Okay, are we ready to move to the next one?
sure are. Yeah.
Okay, let's go to next. We come to Leo rising. So with Leo rising, this is going to put this full moon between the 8th house and the 2nd house. Oh, this just looks to me like, the practical actions of putting your finances in a place that's going to make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, the second house is money and also your
Right.
resources. So in a simple term, this is like if you have the resources to make a donation to something that is near and dear to your heart, do it. It could be a little more your own resources in terms of like what you have to offer for your livelihood in terms of tangibility. You may not have a lot
Could
of
be the soup.
Yeah, it could be.
It could be the soup. I mean, with the sun and all those planets are in the 8th house, other people's deep issues. So, depending on your resources or who you are, or, so many things, this could be you make a pot of soup and bring it to your neighbors that are in need. Or it could be you write a check for $100,000 and give it to some cause where people are suffering. Whatever your situation is, with Virgo, it doesn't have to be a huge thing. It can be a very small detail that makes a big difference. And, with all of these, also, stretch your view out to all the earth signs too.
Yeah.
Because there's so much in that trine that we talked about before.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's interesting too because it's with Leo rising, it just automatically sets you up as a person who has the profound ability for compassion, a deep
Right.
compassion, because that Pisces is always living in that 8th house of,
Yeah.
of other people's difficulties and those kinds of things. So it's a pretty nice
Yeah.
setup for this full moon. So take action on that.
Yeah.
All right.
That's lovely. Okay, so let's move on and get to the next one, which is Virgo rising. Do we know anyone with that?
Yes.
Oh, that one's mine.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at this. This puts the full moon between the 7th house and the 1st. So, the action is very personal. The practical action is I don't know, some detail of I think this is too close to me. I can't see it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I think that if you think of Virgo as the embodiment, this is the embodiment of the desire to develop a meaningful contribution to help others. So it's rather simple in a way. It's just the self-awareness. I mean, I think about you, Laurie, you have these incredible skills to analyze. So you analyze the chart, and then you help people through their astrological chart. I mean, it really brings in that those kinds of abilities into the 1st house, like a way of nourishing your connections with other people. And with that Pisces in the 7th house, there's just this real nourishment available through relationships as well.
And there is such an awareness, with this setup, there's such an awareness of that deep sensitivity and suffering of other people and taking a personal action to support it. Yeah.
Nice.
Okay, that's simple enough. Now let's go to what we have next is going to be, where is it on my list? Libra rising.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so now with Libra rising, that full moon is falling in the 12th to the 6th house.
Yeah. Back at that. I was thinking that this is an interesting juxtaposition where the Virgo full moon is kind of highlighting your connection to the divine, which is an interesting thing, because
Interesting.
so it's kind of like this idea. I would think that people with this need some kind of way to wrestle, some kind of practical, tangible, hands-on way to wrestle with the divine. And so it's
Huh.
interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's that whole seesaw between practicality and spirituality. And for someone
Right.
with Libra rising, there's just a very important connection. And they're also equally able to bring this more transcendent thing into the daily routines.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think of a friend I know with this is a nurse, and taking care of people's needs in that practical realm. I think is quite powerful. So,
Oh, that's so interesting because I have a sister who was also a nurse in her career that has Libra rising and a Virgo moon. So that really does that kind of giving of the self in that way. That really makes sense. That's awesome.
yeah,
Awesome.
cool.
So yeah, take a practical action. We all have to take practical action here for this particular full moon. Now we're going to go from Virgo to those of you with a Scorpio rising. That puts this full moon in the 5th to the 11th house. So it's bringing a kind of a mystical sense of loving others, how you give love, and bringing that into the practical realm of bringing it into community.
Nice. Yeah. I was thinking, what was interesting for me when I was working on this one is that with Scorpio rising, it just means that you have this really lovely ability to just deliver unconditional love, like just without question. I mean, it's really interesting. And then the question becomes, okay, so how do you apply the practicality to your community? How do you, what kinds of, I don't know, practical acts of competence and humility would you like to help your community with? And by doing that, your cup is filled. Your ability to give the unconditional love is filled.
Right.
I just think that's really nice.
That's I like that a lot. And that just makes so much sense.
And also just, some of the folks I know with Scorpio rising, like it's tough because it's tough to have that on the ascendant because it's a difficult opening statement, we'll say. But there's just some really lovely, nourishing things in there, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about some of the people that I know with Scorpio rising, and there is a real sense of transcendence in how they give of themselves. It's really, really true. And bringing that into a practical place for this full moon of the community that feeds them.
Yeah.
Because they are so busy, they have so much of that comes to others from them. And this brings a practical statement of get some of it back as well. Yeah. Huh,
really
interesting.
Nice.
Okay. So
yeah.
From there, we're going to go to Sagittarius rising. And here, this puts the full moon into the 4th house to the 10th house. So the practicality, the practical piece that you need to bring to the table is in some manner in your career or in a outward way through reputation or career.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I think this is being like the sort of the relief that work might provide with difficult things going on at home. Maybe an illness at home, or a child with some struggles at home, or something like that, an elderly parent, and that then you can go to work and do I don't know, just get your hands into something more. That's kind of what I was thinking of with this. So yeah.
For some reason, I just imagine. I don't know why. I just had this picture of someone coming home from their job where they're feeling very practical and they're doing very practical things, and they walk in the house and everyone's watching a movie and having little fantasy things going on.
Yeah.
It's an interesting that Pisces to Scorpio in the 4th to 10th is kind of interesting.
Mm.
It's an interesting placement. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Anything else about that?
Oh, I mean, I think we covered. It's just that interesting juxtaposition between the
Yeah.
work life and the home
Yeah.
life again, and
Yeah.
then I don't know, and how they interplay in your life. So think about that if you have Sagittarius rising.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Then next we're going to go to Capricorn rising. Oh, here it is.
Yeah.
Okay. So with Capricorn rising, this is going to bring this full moon into the 9th house to the 3rd house.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking, so the moon is shining a light in this area of your life where you have your worldview, like the wealth of
Yeah.
experiences that have led you to an accumulated worldview. And so it's this broad picture, like it's taking some kind of action. I almost think this is like, so is there somebody you need to go visit, some travel you need to undertake to help someone out, or something along those lines is what I was thinking.
Bringing your more mystical compassion in communication and bringing it on the road, so to speak.
I mean, anyone with Capricorn rising is going to have that. Pisces is just sitting in a place where it means you can develop a lot of compassion for the common person. This is the ability to really look at just people, ordinary, everyday people, and have a profound sense for them. And then the moon in Virgo is just like, and how you share that wisdom elsewhere through practical acts, or even a writing or some other way of giving out information.
Yeah, that's lovely. I like that. It's so interesting doing these videos with you over time, and just, I mean, having studied astrology my whole life, it's not like it's new. None of it's new, but it's really interesting month after month to just think about exactly, where these signs show up in every individual person. It just becomes more and more set, yes, this full moon is in these areas, but it's always, anyone with Capricorn rising always has Pisces there and always has Virgo there.
Right.
It's part of, we pay attention to the rising sign, but that sets up everything in the life.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that's a really great point, Laurie. And I think really these full moons, they bring you right into the present moment.
Right.
Like, what are you going to do with that moment that
right. Like you've always got that compassion for the common people. You've always got a practical worldview, but this brings it into a moment where it's real and it's necessary to take an action on and pay attention to those areas. It's really fascinating. I really have enjoyed doing these and looking at it that way month after month.
Yeah.
Really great. Okay. So next we're going to go to, if I can find it here. Here we go. Aquarius rising.
Nice.
And that brings this full moon to the moon itself is going to be in the 8th house, and all those Pisces planets, all that little fantasy and compassion, they're into the 2nd house.
Yeah. So I think this is interesting because with the Virgo in the 8th house, the 8th house is, other people's really difficult stuff. In the old days, it was death and taxes and sex and all the kind of things that were tucked away out of common view. And with Virgo here, it suggests that you may have a very great ability to draw fairly clear lines with people, like easily set boundaries in a sense with people. And do it kindly and do it in a way that actually benefits the other person. It's sort of like saying, you know what, you're kind of being a little bit codependent. So I'm going to draw this boundary. I'm drawing it for me, but I'm also drawing it for you. I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking with this. And then you have all that Pisces in the 2nd house of your own self-worth. So there may be, I mean, you can transcend and see the mystical side of yourself with Aquarius rising, but you might also feel confused about your own
Mm,
value.
mm.
And so this is an
Ah,
opportunity to wrestle with the, that value, those values of how you're able to value other people. And really you have a lot
right.
of self-reliance with that
Yeah,
Pisces
yeah.
there because it's
Huh.
profound.
It's really interesting because it really gives you a practical way to support your self-worth.
Mm,
That kind of, like you said, about having a certain amount of confusion around your self-worth and
mhm.
taking an action at this full moon, those practical actions that we've been talking so much about really support that self-worth.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just cool because none of us live in a vacuum and we all have these mirroring things going on. In this case, you're a person, it suggests a person who is able to very clearly see other people's stuff, but have a
Right,
struggle with their own
right.
value of
Yeah,
themselves. So
yeah,
it's a great way to
yeah,
work with it, see what
yeah,
comes up for you if you have
yeah,
this.
yeah. That's really interesting. I like that.
Mm.
Okay, so next we're going to, I think we're coming up on the last one,
We
which
are,
is Pisces rising. Ah,
yeah.
here it
Mhm.
is. Okay, so if you've got Pisces rising, where is this falling? The moon itself is going to fall in your 7th house,
Mhm.
and all those Pisces planets in your 1st.
Mhm.
So there may be some confusion about who you are, but you're a lot more practical when it comes to your partner or, friends, whatever that, people tend to think of the 7th house as the spouse, the romantic partner. And it is that, but it's so much more, it really embodies any one-on-one close partnership.
Yeah, and even a fleeting one,
Right.
sitting down
Yeah.
with someone you don't know
Oh,
well,
yeah.
or sitting down
Yeah.
with your astrologer even,
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, your
um,
astrologer, your therapist, all those kind of one-on-one interaction connections, they're all 7th house.
yeah. Yeah, I was thinking with so Pisces rising, you're very naturally just going to be a dreamer, and that
Yeah.
but the cool thing is that you're able to be extremely practical and helpful to your partner and
Right.
also draw on any partnerships that you have as a resource to help keep you in that more tangible realm. So really the partnership, any partnership it could be a real sweet spot
Yeah.
here with somebody providing a lot of support.
Yeah.
um, but you also providing this softer, more intangible thing.
Yeah.
So it's really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we've covered them all. I'm going to stop sharing. Oh dear, everything on my screen just went crazy. There we go.
Okay.
All right, so I think we're ready to wrap up this full moon.
Yeah.
And the only thing, I don't know if we mentioned
Hmm.
earlier on the date of, this is kind of late in the
Of
video to be
the
bringing
new
it in,
moons.
but the new moon that this is the full moon of in this exact cycle started on March 2nd. But on the
Mhm.
bigger cycle, the full year cycle, we're looking back at the Virgo new moon, which was on September 6th,
Mhm.
um, 2021.
Yeah.
So think about this also as the culmination of that cycle as well.
Yeah.
And if
Great.
you're still with us, then thank you for watching, and we'll be back in a few days to do one for the movement of the sun into Aries. That's going to be a
That's
big one.
right.
Okay.
All right. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Jenny. Bye
Thank
bye.
you, Lori. Bye.